right, guys. Time for episode 2 of Hawk After Dark. I appreciate you coming back and listening to some more of my ramblings. The last episode of Hawk After Dark, I talked about basically like the psychological profiles of Trump supporters. And it was a fairly dark episode. But there was one thing that I wanted to address as well that I didn't have time to talk about in that episode. So I'm going to do a whole episode on this one thing that I didn't get to. Trump's support among evangelical Christians. And I mean, he got something like 76 or 77% of the white evangelical vote in 2016, and that was up over 81% in 2020. So his support among white evangelicals in the United States increased between 2016 to 2020. And that was before Roe versus Wade was overturned too. But those justices were in place by Election Day. And I've read a few articles that are really good. Excuse me, a couple of them were pretty far outside of my comfort zone. And there was one, there's an author and a columnist, a guy named Tim Alberta, and I'm going to talk about his article in a couple of minutes, who was raised by an evangelical pastor outside of Detroit, Michigan. His dad was born again in the mid to late 70s and then dedicated his life to Jesus Christ and became the pastor of a church for 26 or 27 years. And after his father passed away right before COVID hit, his father had found like an heir to his senior position at the church. And the guy that he picked was a young guy who was around 30, and he was an environmentalist. And, he cared about immigrants and things like this, things that would eventually cost him his position, basically. And so Tim Alberta was having a conversation with this guy, after the 2020 election, within the last few months. And Tim asked this pastor a question. He's like, "What is wrong with American evangelicals?" And the pastor said, "America. Too many of them worship and idolize to the point of idolatry the United States of America, nationalism." We're going to come back to that in a minute, because I think that's the thing. I think that is the thing, nationalism. And you combine that with, believing you're the most persecuted group in the United States, even though nothing could be further from the truth. And you believe that you are facing an existential crisis and that you are essentially fighting a holy war. And when you get to that point, it's like all reason is out the door, man. All reason is out the door. And I started thinking about this last week. I read an article by a guy named Pete Wehner, Wehner. He's a columnist, and his stuff is in New York Times, Washington Post. I mean, he puts the stuff all over the place. And he wrote this column. It said, "Have you listened lately to what Trump is saying?" And the subtitle is, "He's becoming frighteningly clear about what he wants." And Pete Wehner he's a former speechwriter, I think, for 3 Republican presidents, worked in 3 or at least 3 Republican presidential administrations. And he is a devout evangelical Christian as well. But he's also a never Trumper and has been from day one, because he could never even begin to reconcile being an evangelical Christian and adhering to the teachings of Jesus Christ and simultaneously support someone like Donald Trump. And we're going to talk about that dichotomy in a minute as well. But Pete Wehner starts off this article, was in the New York Times within the last 2 weeks, talking about Rwanda and the Rwanda massacre and the concept of dehumanization through language. And that is what Donald Trump is doing right now in every single one of his campaign speeches, and has been since the beginning of this campaign. When you think about where he announced his current campaign for president for the 2024 election, he announced it in Waco, Texas. Branch Davidians struggle against the government, persecuted for their religion, and killed by the government. And lots of talk about the left and using dehumanizing language, lauding the January 6th. He opened up that rally with a recorded version of the national anthem that had been sung into a cell phone by in a jail that was housing like 15 or 20 of the January 6th defendants who'd been arrested at the Capitol for beating up police officers and things along those lines. That's how Trump's campaign for the 2024 election started. That's how it started. Totally normal and fine, right? So Pete Weiner starts off this article talking about the Rwanda massacre by and the largest group in Rwanda were called the Hutus, and the minority ethnic group were called the Tutsis. And the dehumanizing language had gone back all the way to like 1959, 1960 with leaders in that country. And so by the time whatever it was, 1992, 93 rolls around, that spark, the cue was given by a leader, and the slaughter began. And within like 3.5 months, more than 1 million people had been killed in Rwanda, most of them with machetes. Yeah. And before I get too far into this stuff, and people may disagree with me, I firmly believe that there is a subset of Donald Trump's most fervent supporters who would love nothing more than to have a Rwanda-style massacre of the left in the United States. I mean, they couch it in terms of civil war. They talk about it all the damn time, and they talk about it to a point where it's like you have to take them seriously. We don't have any choice but to take this seriously. They talk about with great glee and enthusiasm the idea of killing us in the streets, people who are on the left. And Donald Trump talks about, at campaign rallies that we're vermin and things like this, and we're the threat from within, echoing Mein Kampf and Adolf Hitler, and the crowd goes crazy. The crowd goes freaking wild when he talks about that stuff. So those are some of the ideas that we're going to talk about in this podcast, and how it can possibly be that evangelical Christians support that and support Trump when he is saying these things repeatedly over and over and over, inciting violence and threatening judges and threatening prosecutors and threatening court clerks on a daily basis, and calling people like me vermin who need to be exterminated. Because, what would Jesus do? Apart from ride a dinosaur while carrying an AR-15 on his way to the gym to get super jacked. But, okay. So what was his most recent thing? He gave a speech on Veterans Day, and he said to the crowd, "We pledge to you that we will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country, that lie and steal and cheat on elections," Trump said toward the end of his speech in Claremont, New Hampshire. "They'll do anything, whether legally or illegally, to destroy America and to destroy the American dream," the former president continued. "The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within. Our threat is from within." When Trump finished his speech, the audience erupted in applause. It's the same kind of shit that leaders were saying for 30 years in Rwanda leading up to the massacre of the Tutsi people. It's the same shit that Adolf Hitler used to say in his speeches throughout the 30s before World War II. It's the same stuff. It is the same stuff. And he went on further in some recent interviews, talking about those same people and then talking about immigrants coming into this country. He said it's poisoning the blood of our country. And in a rally in September in Dubuque, Iowa, Trump said, what they are doing to our country, they are destroying it. It is the blood of our country. What they are doing is destroying our country, poisoning the blood of our country. That's almost direct quotes from 1930s Germany. I mean, really. And what is this rhetoric designed to do? It's designed by Trump to dehumanize people who oppose him. It is designed to dehumanize people who disagree with him. And it is designed to give his supporters permission to do the same thing. If you support Trump in October, November 2023, you support that. You support the dehumanization of anybody who doesn't agree with Donald Trump. And that is an incredibly dangerous slope that we are going down as a country. It is incredibly dangerous. It is fascism 101, man. And a couple of good quotes just about the concept of dehumanization. It's like you're classifying people as these beings who have a human appearance, but a subhuman essence about them. And there was a good quote. Let me find this guy's name. David Livingston Smith. He's a philosophy professor and he writes about a lot of history. Ironically, it is our inability to regard other people as nothing but animals that leads to unimaginable cruelty and destructiveness. Dehumanized people can be turned into something worse than animals. They can be turned into monsters. They aren't just dangerous, they are metaphysically threatening. They are not just subhuman, they are irredeemably destructive and must be destroyed. Yeah. And, and Trump goes on to say a lot of these things about all kinds of entities and groups. I mean, he says it about the deep state. He says it about prosecutors. He says it about judges. He says it about the media. And I mean, he put out a thing on Truth Social recently about his own handpicked chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, because Mark Milley stood up to him during the final months of Trump's presidency. Trump didn't like that. And Trump put out a post on Truth Social basically very, very strongly implying that because of that, Mark Milley should be executed for treason. And at a recent event, a Trump event in Iowa, a few days after that post, there were some folks for NBC who were interviewing some folks in the crowd, some Trump supporters. One Trump supporter asked why Milley wasn't in there before a firing squad within a month. Another told NBC News, treason is treason. There's only one cure for treason, being put to death. And think about the things that Trump has said about Nancy Pelosi's husband over the last year, and the things that he's said about Jack Smith and Fani Willis and Judge Engeron in New York and Judge Engeron's clerk. And also I'm reminded of this too. For Donald Trump, I believe the high point, the personal highlight for Donald Trump of his presidency was watching the violence unfold at January 6th at the Capitol. And because he saw thousands of his supporters committing violence on his behalf. And because he's a malignant narcissist and a sociopath, he got off on that. He enjoyed it greatly. He enjoyed nothing more than watching his own supporters beat the shit out of police officers and commit all of this violence on his behalf, fighting to keep him in office, even though he had just lost re-election and he knew that he lost re-election. And most of his supporters know it too. They were just angry and they're sore losers, just like Fat Nixon is. Um, you know, which feeds into him announcing his campaign at Waco, Texas, the site of the Branch Davidian standoff. David Koresh, in 1992 or 93, when Bill Clinton had just taken office and Janet Reno was Attorney General, and who was I reading about? Oh, I'm reading this book. I'm reading a book right now called Homegrown. It's a book about Timothy McVeigh, and it goes into great detail talking about how the events at Ruby Ridge in Idaho, which happened in 91 or 92 when Randy Weaver. If you haven't looked into Ruby Ridge, Randy Weaver, you should Google that. It was another example of tremendous federal law enforcement overreach. And then the following year was Waco, Texas, and the Branch Davidians and David Koresh. And when that siege finally concluded, 75 or 80 Branch Davidians died, and a whole bunch of them were children. Because that church burned to the ground. Part of the reason that church burned to the ground, or that building burned to the ground, that compound, is because they built it themselves. And per David Koresh, he was like, nah, just build it out of plywood, man. It doesn't need to be super sturdy or anything like that, because Jesus is returning soon. And so when it caught fire, it just went up like that. In less than an hour, the entire building burned to the ground. A huge building, gone in less than an hour, along with 75 or 80 people. And that's where Trump chose to announce his campaign. People who had been religiously persecuted by the federal government, while he's, lionizing and lauding the January 6th insurrectionists who were in prison, referring to them as political prisoners, and playing the national anthem sung by them from jail. It's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. But, think about how Trump rolled out his campaign, his 2016 campaign, when he came down the golden escalator in June 2015. And he spoke about Mexican immigrants and all of the things that he said that horrified so many people, except for people in the Republican base. He shot to the top of the polls and never left until he got the nomination. So what did he say at the Waco rally? That's where he started getting explicit about things. He said, "I am your warrior. I am your justice. For those who have been wronged and betrayed, of which there are many people out there that have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution." Trump described 2024 as our final battle. You don't get much more like religious apocalypse than that. I mean, these people think they're fighting a holy war. They think they're fighting a holy war for the United States of America because they believe that the United States of America has been particularly singled out and blessed by God. And they want to merge these two worlds of a holy, blessed United States of America with God's kingdom, which, I mean, that might make for a fun amusement park, but that's not any world that I want to frickin' live in. And and in this article, I mean, Pete Wehner goes on to talk about, because he's had a great deal of trouble trying to understand how actual evangelicals can support Donald Trump. Knowing everything we know about this guy, knowing that there's absolutely nothing evangelical about him at all. And there's a really good section in this article. He says, "By now, I know how this plays out. For most Republicans to acknowledge to others and even to themselves what Donald Trump truly is and still stay loyal to him would create enormous cognitive dissonance. Their mind won't allow them to go there. Instead, they find ways to ease the inner conflict. And so they embrace conspiracy theories to support what they desperately want to believe." They believe the 2020 election was stolen, or that the investigation into Russian ties in 2016 campaign was a hoax, or that Joe Biden has committed multiple criminal and impeachable offenses. They indulge in whataboutism and catastrophism to justify their support for Trump. They have a burning psychological need to rationalize why, in this moment in history, the ends justifies the means. And it's just, oh God. And in light of all of this, man, you know, and it's like these are the same people who accuse people like me of having Trump derangement syndrome. You know, these people who claim that, you know, they've turned their lives over to Jesus Christ, but they still support Donald Trump. They accuse us of being deranged. You know, despite Trump's well-documented depravity, he still has a vice grip on the GOP. He carried 94% of the Republican vote in 2020, which was an increase from 2016. He is leading his closest primary challengers nationally by more than 45 points. White evangelical Protestants are among the Republican Party's most loyal constituencies, and in 2020, more than 8 in 10 white evangelical Christians voted for Trump. And that's an increase over 2016. His support has been growing. Here's one of my favorite sentences. Trump's support among white evangelicals is still extremely high. 81% hold a favorable view of him, according to a poll taken in June after Donald Trump was indicted for a second time. That's where the conspiracy theories come in. It's a political witch hunt. It's the weaponized DOJ. Joe Biden has weaponized his attorney general. These prosecutors are all crooked. That is where the conspiracy theory thinking comes in. He got his first indictment was 34 felony counts out of New York. His second one, I think, was 12 or 13 felony counts, or maybe 30 felony counts, give or take, in the Mar-a-Lago documents case. So after he got over 60 felony indictments against him, felony counts in 2 separate indictments, his support among white evangelicals increased. It went up. Oh God. And here, so and then we start to get, you know, the holy war thing starts to come about. The evangelical movement in America has been reshaped by the sensibilities of Trump and MAGA world. For example, in one survey, this was just last year, nearly 1/3 of white evangelicals expressed support for the statement, because things have gotten so far off track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. Cool. It is a rather remarkable indictment of those who claim to be followers of Jesus that they would continue to show fealty to a man whose cruel ethic has always been the antithetical to Jesus's and becomes more so every day. They continue to stand foursquare behind a man who uses words that echo Mein Kampf. Again, I mean, I read a lot, obviously. I read a lot, and it's just lately, you know, more and more of the things that I read, that was depressing. That was just depressing, okay? But that's, you know, that's reality of where we're at right now. Oh my God, man. So after that article from Pete Wehner, excuse me, that one appeared in the Atlantic, not the New York Times. I'm sorry. Donald Trump lost his mud on Truth Social. I don't even know that I want to. Yeah, who cares? Who gives a shit what Donald Trump had to say in response to that article? But again, the broader point is still there. It's like, how are these people who claim to turn their will and their heart and their life over to Jesus Christ, how do they support someone like Donald Trump? And I think that the answer to that first question that Tim Alberta asked that young pastor is spot on. It's like, the United States of America has become an idol. They idolize it and they worship it at an idolatry level. And they worship this idea of America that lives in their minds. That I don't even know if it ever existed. I mean, I guess they want to go back to like 1952 or something. And they think they have the right to do that because God. And they think that divine whatever also gives them the right and the obligation to impose, their version of morality on us. I mean, I saw a thing about the new Speaker of the House, the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Um, he wants to ban birth control nationwide in all of its forms. He wants a nationwide abortion ban. He wants to take away all LGBTQ rights to anything and everything in this country. He wants to ban gay marriage, and he wants to make any form of gay sexual activity a criminal offense nationwide. He wants to do these things nationwide. And somehow he is not considered to be mentally ill and insane by tens of millions of Americans. I watched a clip on YouTube earlier today. Christopher Hitchens, who I miss greatly, and who has written some truly amazing books. Man, I miss that guy. He was talking about, he was just like, we know more now. We have better explanations for the cosmos. We have better explanations for the weather. We have better explanations for how the planet Earth came to be. We have better explanations for science and medicine and things like that, and microorganisms, and viruses and things like that. Better explanations than existed at the times that these religions came into being: Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, whatever. And he's like, man, if only they'd had some better explanations back then, and these religions never would have taken off. They never would have gotten off the ground, and we wouldn't be where we are today. And I heard that, and I was like, damn, man, ain't that the truth, man? Holy crap. So then I found some polling in another article, and this is from February of 2021. So like a year after the insurrection, like 14, 15 months after election day in 2020. And this was some work done by the University of Chicago Divinity School. And again, why white evangelicals stuck with Trump in the 2020 election. And they did some polling, and comparing 2016 to 2020, improve the economy was the number one thing for both. In 2016, personal character was number 3 on the list. By 2020, it was number 7. In an exact inverse of that, in 2016, a candidate's position on abortion was number 7 or 8. By 2020, it was in number 3. And there was one more. What was the other thing in there that I wanted to see? I don't remember. But, so Trump knew that he had to win over evangelicals, especially in 2016. That's why he picked Mike Pence. I mean, that's the whole reason why he picked Mike Pence to be his running mate, because Mike Pence spoke their language. He speaks their language. He can communicate with them, and would get Trump that level of credibility with evangelical voters that he wouldn't otherwise have gotten. I mean, not even close. And so Pence opened the door with evangelicals for Trump, basically saying, it's okay. He's with me. It's okay. He's with me. Uh, and and Trump paid attention to that a lot during his presidency. Um, you know, because he focused a good amount of time on two things, whether it's through his court picks or through his executive orders. Through his court picks, it was like abortion, 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 abortion. Got to ban abortion. Got to overturn Roe v. Wade. And it was also religious freedom. And he did a lot of things to enhance or increase or highlight, Christian religious freedom in the United States during his presidency through executive orders. And evangelicals love that shit. And I've talked a lot in my TikToks. It's like whenever you hear somebody use the phrase religious freedom, to me, they're always leaving off the two most important words: religious freedom to discriminate, because that's what religious freedom means now in the United States. Religious freedom to discriminate against the LGBTQ community, specifically, and trans kids and queer kids, and gay marriage and gay adoption and any kind of LGBTQ rights at all. And it involves a lot of bigotry because they all wrap this stuff up in white Christian nationalism too. And in the next article that I'm going to talk about, I found some really interesting things that, there's a lot of history that suggests that part of the birth of the religious right in the United States that happened, in like the early 70s, everybody thinks, oh, it's Roe v. Wade, it's Roe v. Wade. A big part of it was segregation too. They wanted to be able to be segregated. So, yeah. But, religious freedom to discriminate. And again, it's like, man, it's not a difficult concept to understand. Religious freedom means I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z because of my religious beliefs. And evangelicals believe that religious freedom means you can't do X, Y, and Z because of my religious beliefs. And it's like, can you imagine the entitlement and the arrogance that a person must have to believe that? God told me that I have to regulate how you live your life because of my religious beliefs. What kind of absolute psychopathic whack job do you have to be to believe that in your own head? I have to regulate the lives of everyone around me because they're lost. They don't have Jesus. It's up to me to regulate how they live their lives. That is the most arrogant crap I've ever heard in my entire life. And it's just shockingly dumb. It's like, I have enough trouble managing my own life, as I think we've all learned on TikTok over the last couple of years. It's like, why would I want to? That's why I've never understood polygamy, man. Or polyamory for that matter. I mean, we'll save that for another day. It's like managing my own life or managing one relationship is enough, man. It's enough. I'm not going to try to manage all this other stuff around me. It's just, I don't get it, man. I just don't get it. I don't understand it. And, it's like, then they also go into like, and again, this is still the study that was done by University of Chicago Divinity School. They talk about peer pressure, basically peer pressure in church communities, and especially during COVID, so many church communities, in fighting lockdowns and all this stuff. I mean, it's like they linked together in this holy war with Donald Trump to save the divinely blessed United States of America, this country that had been handpicked, by God which, you know what? 4 words never appear anywhere in the Bible. United States of America. Okay. Our country's so special, God forgot to put it in his book. Um, I'm sure that was just an oversight. I mean, and speaking of the United States of America, so like God slept through 250 years of slavery. He slept through 100 years of Jim Crow. He slept through, I don't know, 350 years of the ongoing massacre and slaughter of the First Nations, Native American populations in this country. Tens of millions of people. I mean, but he cares who's president. God cares who's president. I mean, when you look at our history, it really doesn't sound like the United States of America was picked by God and uniquely ordained. I mean, our country's built on a foundation of slavery, slaughter, and stealing land. But apart from that, it's awesome. And now we're about to vote in fascistic authoritarianism and theocracy. That's going to be fun. But he talks about in this article, they talk a lot about, these church communities and loyalty to Trump became part of the identity of these church communities. And if you were a part of these communities, it's like I think back to the church community that my grandparents had, the farmers in Mansfield, Ohio, and rural Ohio. And we grew up in a Lutheran church on my dad's side of the family. And it was this small little rural church. It had a big basement with a kitchen and a huge meeting area. And the Sunday school classrooms were built off to the side. And the whole community came to that church on Sunday mornings. And, you had church service and we had Sunday school. And then after every service, big potluck, everybody would stay and eat down in the basement. And it was great. And it was the community aspect of it was the thing that I enjoyed the most. But it was everyone from this farming community that came to this church on Sunday mornings. And think about speaking out in that kind of an environment if you'd been going there for 20 or 25 years. And these were your friends. And they talk about this peer pressure a lot. And I think that was a huge component as well. There was another guy who wrote an article in this magazine called Discourse Magazine, this guy named Mark David Hall. And he talks a lot about the history of the religious right. And this is where, a lot of scholars, most scholars contend that these leaders and voters were motivated by opposition to the Supreme Court's decisions on school prayer, Bible reading and abortion, as well as the Equal Rights Amendment, LGBTQ activism, secularism, communism, and socialism. Okay. Yeah. I don't think these people even know what communism and socialism even mean. But, he also cites a scholar who says, one of the other main catalysts for the religious right was a 1971 federal district court case, Green versus Connolly, that upheld a 1970 IRS policy that denied tax-exempt status to private schools, religious schools, that discriminated on the basis of race. And so segregation was part of it. And there was also a few years later, there was a court case involving Bob Jones University because Bob Jones University had a policy against interracial dating among their students. And, so then this guy goes on to actually say, racism and segregation didn't play any part at all. And, after citing 3 or 4 cases that are all about race. And I think there was there one more thing in here? Yeah, he talks about Trump's executive orders on religious liberty, religious freedom, and his judicial appointments. And I wanted to read 2 paragraphs from this. The closing 2 paragraphs, because this guy is an evangelical. He voted for Trump in 2020, and he basically wrote this article trying to justify that vote. And in these last two paragraphs, I was just like, whew, wow. Most notably, Trump's presidency resulted in a Supreme Court that has overturned the second worst Supreme Court decision ever made, Roe versus Wade, an outcome that will hopefully result in saving many lives. For me and every other evangelical I know, overturning Roe versus Wade was long our top priority. I understand that readers who don't share my political priorities may disagree with my vote in 2020, but it is profoundly uncivil, not to mention inaccurate, to claim that I and most of my fellow evangelicals voted for Trump because we are racists or because we were motivated by, in Hillary Clinton's words, she's always their boogeyman, racist, sexist, homophobic, and Islamophobic views. Yeah, but you've all decided that being a racist, being a sexist, being a homophobic, being xenophobic, and being Islamophobic are not deal breakers for you. I wonder if those things were deal breakers for Jesus, because they're not deal breakers for you, evangelical author of this article. And so let's talk about this article by Tim Alberta. It's really good. It just came out in this week's Atlantic magazine. It's a very long article, and it's about his father, his faith, and Donald Trump. And he talks about his history with his dad growing up, how his dad became evangelical, and then starting to see the conflict between these two groups of evangelicals, who he viewed as one group who was staying faithful to the covenant of Jesus Christ, and this other group over here who was letting their support for Donald Trump and their nationalism for the United States take over while merging in some twisted way with their Christian faith. And so, like, he recounts this one little vignette back in, I think it was 2019. Yeah, because he's talking about, he wrote a book about Donald Trump that was unflattering to Donald Trump, and a lot of people in the evangelical community who he had grown up with turned on him because of that book. And so around this time was when it came out that the Trump administration had a policy of forcibly separating migrant families at the U.S.-Mexico border. There's a guy named Russell Moore who was a very prominent leader in the Southern Baptist Convention. He tweeted, quote, "Those created in the image of God should be treated with dignity and compassion, especially those seeking refuge from violence back home." That tweet made Jerry Falwell Jr. angry. He was Jerry Falwell's son, founder of the Moral Majority, and he was then president of Liberty University. It had not yet come out that he and his wife, that Jerry Falwell Jr. liked to watch while his wife had sex with a young pool boy. That's a fun story. Okay, so Jerry Falwell Jr. got very upset and tweeted, "Who are you, Dr. Moore? Have you ever made payroll? Have you ever built an organization of any type from scratch? What gives you the authority to speak on any issue?" And that's when Tim Alberta is like, "Oh, okay, so here's where we're at. We have Russell Moore Christians and we have Jerry Falwell Jr. Christians." And, and then he talks about a TV appearance where he was talking about all this stuff. And by the time he got done with this TV appearance, he got his cell phone back and he found out that his dad had just died of a heart attack. His dad, who had led this Cornerstone Church outside of Detroit for 26 years and had retired just a couple of years before his death. And So he and his brother were in charge of eulogizing their dad and speaking at the showing the day before the funeral. And in this church that had, 2,000, 2,500 members, that the author Tim Alberta had grown up in almost his entire life, that his father had been the senior pastor for most of his life. And earlier that week, because Tim Alberta had written this book about Donald Trump that contained some unflattering information, Tim Alberta was getting name checked on Rush Limbaugh's program. Rush Limbaugh was singling him out and saying mean things about him. At the showing, when Tim Alberta and his brothers are standing there shaking hands with members from the community who knew their dad, members of the church who'd known their dad for decades, people started giving him shit about Rush Limbaugh. People were coming up and saying unflattering things to him in the funeral line for his dad about things that Rush Limbaugh had said to him. They were agreeing with Rush Limbaugh. And he was like, understandably, he was like, what the F is going on here? And it's at the end of this article where he has that conversation with this young pastor who took over. What is wrong with American evangelicals? America, he replied. Too many of them worship America. They have chosen to idealize a Christian America that puts them at odds with their Christian identity. They have allowed their national identity to shape their faith identity instead of the other way around. Excuse me. And I think that's the crux. That is it. They have chosen to merge their Christianity with this idealized Christian version of the United States that's never existed. And they merge those and they think they're in an existential holy war, and that Donald Trump is the only one who is fighting for them on their behalf, helping them with judges and executive orders for religious freedom. And it has completely, utterly warped their brains. And COVID didn't help. But here we are. So, all right, we are out of time on this episode. I want to thank everybody again for listening and subscribing. If you're seeing this, you subscribed at the $10 a month level. I appreciate that more than you know, because I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. I want to do this full time instead. I've greatly enjoyed the last couple of months of adjusting to being self-employed, and I hope that this will help me in that regard. And so I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's watching this, because that means that you've subscribed and it means the world to me. So stay tuned for more episodes, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.